in regards to the mitzvah of Hakel, the Torah starts off by saying, Miketz Sheva Shonim at the end of 7 years, B'moyed Shnas HaShmita at the time of Shemitah, B'chag HaSukkos on the Yom Tov of Sukkos, you should then go gather the Yidden, etc. Rashi quotes from the pasuk the words Miketz Sheva Shonim and translates that it means the first year of the Shemitah cycle, which is the 8th year. In other words, following from the previous Shemitah, then it's the 8th year. So why is it being called Shnas HaShemitah? Says Rashi, because the dinim of Shemitah still apply. In other words, things that had grown towards the end of the 7th year, and now you're harvesting them during the 8th year. So the dinim of Shemitah still apply to that produce. Says the Rebbe, as we learned the Rashi simply, it sounds like what Rashi is coming to deal with, what concerns Rashi, is the wording of the pasuk. The pasuk says, Miketz Sheva Shonim, the end of the 7th year. And that's the way we would have understood it, that it's referring to sometime at the end of that 7th year. That's also understood from the words B'moyed Shnas HaShmita. It sounds like we're speaking about within the Shemitah year. And then the pasuk says, B'chag HaSukkos. Now, Sukkos is clearly not the end of the year. It's not the end of the 7th year. And this is what Rashi tells us. Miketz Sheva Shonim over here means the first year of the Shemitah, which is, in other words, really the 8th year when we're looking from the previous Shemitah cycle. So Rashi is telling us that yes, Miketz does mean the end. And as Rashi told us already in Parshas Miketz, that every time the Torah uses the word Ketz, it means the end. But in our case, what it means is after the end. In other words, after we finished the 7-year cycle, so now we are in the beginning of the 8th year. However, since the Torah does use the term B'moyed Shnas HaShmita, which would seem to imply that we're speaking about within the Shemitah year, this is why Rashi continues with the next part and says, why is it being called Shemitah? It's because certain dinim of Shemitah still apply. However, says the Rebbe, if that's the case, then two things are not understood. Number one, the Rashi should have quoted the words, after saying Miketz Sheva Shonim, he should have quoted the words B'chag HaSukkos, or at least say V'goymer, because that seems to be what's causing the whole problem in our pasuk, that it's the Sukkos that seems to be saying that we're not speaking by the end of the 7th year. Number two, if Rashi is coming over here to teach us that Miketz Sheva Shonim means after the end of the 7 years, not as we would have thought at the end of the 7th year, then all Rashi should have said is Shehi Shana Shminis. So we're speaking now about the beginning of the 8th year. Why does Rashi have to say that it's B'Shana Rishona Shel Shemitah, that it's the first year of the Shemitah cycle, which seemingly has nothing to do with translating the word Miketz? It seems to be not adding anything to the understanding of our pasuk. Says the Rebbe, in fact, when we look at the Mishnah and Gemara, when we speak about the mitzvah of Hakel, they refer to it as B'Shmini or B'Shminis, the 8th year. It totally does not mention this idea that it's the beginning, the first year of Shemitah. Says the Rebbe, perhaps we would be able to answer this last question by saying that maybe Rashi is actually coming to tell us something completely different. Perhaps Rashi is giving us a different translation in the word Miketz and in Sheva Shonim, and automatically also negating another thing that we could have perhaps tried to learn from our pasuk. And that is, this is all a suggestion that maybe this is what Rashi is coming to say, perhaps something else that is like this. Without Rashi, maybe we would have thought that Miketz means the end. But what we're referring to is the end of the 7-year cycle, not at the end of the 7 years, but rather the whole 7th year. Maybe that's what we would have thought without Rashi. Miketz Sheva Shonim means the end of the 7-year cycle, so we're speaking about the whole 7th year. And then, Moyed Shnas HaShmita then would mean, in other words, we're speaking about within the Shemitah year. But which part of the Shemitah year? Sukkos. That means the beginning of the 7th year. And that's when Hakel should be. In other words, we're understanding the whole 7th year as being Miketz, the end of the 7-year cycle. And therefore, Sukkos could be the beginning of that 7th year. And perhaps this is what Rashi is coming to negate and say, no, don't think that that's the pshat. And instead he says, Miketz Sheva Shonim, again, this is a suggestion. We're now suggesting, maybe Rashi is saying, that Miketz actually does not mean the end at all. Rather, Miketz over here means the beginning. Many of the Mefarshim of the Torah translate the word Miketz could sometimes mean beginning, sometimes can mean the end. So perhaps this is what Rashi is saying when he says Shana Rishona Shel Shemitah, that it's actually speaking about the beginning of the year, the beginning of the 7-year cycle, the first year of the 7-year cycles, that's when you have Hakel. And that's what the Torah meant when you say Miketz Sheva Shanim. We don't mean after the Shemitah cycle. The Torah actually means specifically at the beginning of the Shemitah cycle. Says the Rebbe, but if that's the case, if that's what Rashi means, then the question is the other way around. Why is then Rashi saying Sheishana Shminis, that is the 8th year, which does sound like it's implying that it's a continuation to the Shemitah cycle. The way we just explained it, it's nothing to do with a continuation to the previous cycle. We're just saying that Miketz Sheva Shanim means at the beginning of 7 years. More importantly, says the Rebbe, if in fact Rashi is trying to say that Miketz Sheva Shanim over here would be different than the way it's always, where usually it means the end and here it means the beginning, Rashi should have said it, number one, as a chidush. In other words, to tell us that here it's different to the way usually Kates means, because Rashi told us already that Kates usually means the end. Rashi should have brought a proof to this idea that Kates could be translated as the beginning. And furthermore, Rashi should have said it as a translation for the words Miketz Sheva Shanim. Rashi should have said Shana Rishona Shel Shemitah. Miketz means the beginning of the 7-year cycle. From the wording of Rashi, from Rashi's expression that we're referring to Bishana Rishona Shel Shemitah, that we're dealing with within the first year of the Shemitah, it seems to be implying that Rashi is not coming to tell us the translation of the word Miketz. Miketz Sheva Shanim means the beginning of 7 years. He's just coming to explain to us when exactly is this time that it's happening. It's the beginning of the Shemitah cycle, which is the Shminis, the 8th, to the previous cycle. Says the Rebbe. Another thing we need to understand generally is, why is it relevant over here, even in the Pasuk? Why is it relevant that this is the time of Shemitah, and as Rashi explains this to mean, that the dinim of Shemitah still apply with that which is harvested from the produce of the 7th year coming into the following year? Why is this all relevant over here, B'chlal? The Isur of the produce from the 7th year in the 8th year, we know, according to one opinion, from earlier on, Rashi actually told us already on a pasuk, B'charish uv'katzir tishbois, that you need to be resting from plowing and from harvesting, etc. It was learned already from there, from that pasuk, that you're not allowed to have the produce from the 7th year and the 8th year. And the Rebbe says either way, it seems to have nothing to do with the mitzvah of Hakel to start teaching us now the dinim of Shemitah. That now certain dinim of Shemitah still apply. So why is the Torah even mentioning these points over here? Says the Rebbe, the explanation of all of this is, Rashi actually does not have to explain the word Miketz at all, because as we said before, Rashi had already told us in the beginning of Parshas Miketz that Kol Loshen Ketz, anytime it says Ketz, it means the end. And therefore, clearly it's understood that every single time the meaning is exactly that, and the same thing would mean over here, that Miketz means after the 7 years. Rashi, however, is coming to explain a more general question in regards to the whole timing of mitzvahs Hakel. The Rebbe says, we discussed a number of times, that in a number of places we find that Rashi will answer a general idea regarding a new section coming up, regarding a new parsha coming up right in the beginning, even though the question technically may only arise in the later psukim, because since we're dealing with psukim, all of one section and one parsha, and it's something of a very, very general nature that's going to be relevant to all of the psukim, Rashi needs to explain it at the very beginning. So what is bothering Rashi over here regarding the whole timing of mitzvahs Hakel? But first, before that, says the Rebbe, to preface, we understand that even in Pshutei Shel Mikra, we clearly see that in mitzvahs of the Torah, we have the mitzvahs that have reasons given for them. We also have the mitzvahs that are called chukim, where no reason was given to them. Amongst the mitzvahs that there is a reason given, whether Torah says the reason, Torah explains the reason, or it's a self-understood reason. So we have amongst those also, we have some mitzvahs that also all the details have reasons given for them, and we have mitzvahs that at least some of the details, al derech hapshat, are not explained. What about mitzvahs Hakel? In the mitzvah of Hakel, the Torah clearly tells us the point, the goal, the intention of the mitzvah. L'man yiru, l'man yishmu, l'man yilmadu, so that the Yidden should hear and learn to fear Hashem. And so too it's understood also the reasons for the details that the Torah says, The Torah says that it should happen when all the Yidden are coming to be seen by the Beis HaMikdash, to be seen by Hashem in the place where Hashem chooses. Obviously, when the Yidden are all the Beis HaMikdash together, it's easier to gather all of the Yidden. It's also in the place where the Eibishter chooses. This is going to be a place that's more fitting to be Poyel Aman Yishmu, that the Yidden should hear and learn and fear Hashem. So this is all obvious and this is clear out in the Psukim. But the question then arises about the timing. The Torah says that the appropriate time for this is Miketz Sheva Shanim, at the end of 7 years. And here's the question. When we want to be ma'oided, when we want to inspire, we want to arouse people to do something, especially when we're speaking about something like Yiras Hashem, which is the whole point of Mitzvahs Hakel, you would assume that the time to be ma'oided people is not at the end of a period, but rather at the beginning of a new era, at the beginning of a new period. We're starting a whole new period. We need some sort of inspiration for that time. Inspiration should come at the beginning, not at the end. And this is what Rashi is actually telling us. That Eino Chanami, that's taka exactly what's happening. This inspiration is coming B'shana Rishoina Shol Shemitah. It's coming at the beginning. It's becoming at the beginning of the Shemitah cycle. However, if that's the case, so then it's not understood. And why does the pasuk say Miketz Sheva Shanim, which makes it seem to be implying and emphasizing that it's coming directly at the end and a continuation to the 7-year cycle? And this is what Rashi says. Doesn't only say it's the beginning of B'shana Rishoina Shel Shemitah. Rashi says Shana Shminis, which is one of our questions. Why do we say that it's Shana Shminis? Because it is relevant that it's the 8th year, meaning to say that it's a year following Shemitah. The 7th year, that's the year of Shemitah. It's a year following Shemitah. Why is it so relevant? Says the Rebbe, let's understand what Shemitah is all about. Shemitah is the time, as the pasuk describes, Shabbos, and Yiyah La'aretz. It's a time of rest for the land. You're not allowed to sow your fields, and you're not allowed to prune your vineyards, and you're not allowed to harvest the things that grow by themselves, and the grapes you're not allowed to cut, etc., etc. From this we understand, even in Pshutei Shel Mikra, that this is a time that Yidden are free from all sorts of work of the land, which that was the main thing that they were involved in at the time. And therefore Yidden clearly have much more time to spend on Limudat Torah, on learning Torah, which brings to Yiras Hashem and keeping mitzvahs. Says the Rebbe, now we can clearly see the connection between the mitzvah of Hakel, which is the first year of a Shemitah cycle, and the Shemitah that it's just coming from, that we just finished. That is, when we're about to start a new cycle of 6 years sowing and 6 years pruning, etc. So in the very beginning of that Shemitah cycle, we need to have some extra Yesod, some extra inspiration, which should impact the following 6 years. That even then we should have all of the fear of Hashem and keep all the words of the Torah and so on. How do we do this? This we do by reminding ourselves of everything that happened in the Shemitah year, taking the Shemitah inspiration with us for the rest of for the next 6 years. In other words, we think about the time that we were completely dedicated in Limudat Torah, completely permeated with Yiras Hashem. That was what's happening in Shemitah. So Hakel is, let's continue this. Let's strengthen this inspiration from the Shemitah, take it along for the following 6 years when we're going to be involved in the work of the land. And this is what Rashi is indicating and emphasizing when he calls it Shana Shminis, that is the 8th year. So yes, on the one hand, it's the beginning of the 6 years, or the next cycle, but it needs to be not only a beginning of a new cycle, of a Shemitah cycle, but rather it also needs to be a continuation of the previous year. It's an 8th year. It's following the year of Shemitah. Says the Rebbe, based on this, we're also going to understand what Rashi says. We're calling it the 7th year. Why? Because the dinim of Shemitah still apply, which we asked before. Seemingly, this is totally not understood. Why is the pasuk in Parshas Hakel telling us about the fact that certain dinim of Shemitah still apply? Says the Rebbe, this isn't a side issue. It's not a side point that it happens to be that certain dinim of Shemitah still apply, but that has nothing to do with Hakel. Says the Rebbe, on the contrary, in order to continue this inspiration from the previous Shemitah year, the pasuk is emphasizing that even right now in the 8th year, we're still calling it related to Shnas HaShemitah. The dinim of Shemitah still apply to a certain extent. Meaning to say, it's not only now a new beginning of a new cycle, where we still have just a memory or a oidus from the previous Shemitah year, but much more than that. We actually still have some of Shemitah we're taking along with us. In the harvest of the produce that was coming from the Shemitah year into the 8th year, we're still acting in a certain way with the dinim of Shemitah. And therefore there's still free time for learning Torah and so on. Says the Rebbe, from the amazing things that we also have al pi halacha that we could take from this Rashi, is that we know that there is, when we look at the idea of Hakel, and that it's coming following Shemitah, Miketz Sheva Shonim in the time of Shemitah, etc. So, generally there's two ways of understanding this. Is the Torah just giving us a siman? It's a sign which year we need to do Hakel. So it's the 8th year, it's the year coming after Shemitah? Or is it somehow dependent on the fulfilling of the mitzvah of Shemitah? Once we fulfill the mitzvah of Shemitah, now we can go to Hakel. What would be the practical difference? So the Rebbe says, so practically, let's say in the time of the second Beis HaMikdash. So there's a machloikas regarding Shemitah in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, second Beis HaMikdash, whether it was midoiraisa or only midrabanan. If you say it's only midrabanan, that means from the Torah's perspective there is no Shemitah then, according to the opinion that Hakel was just, that Hakel's following Shemitah is just a siman, it's just a sign for us to know when Hakel is, then we're going to say that even if it's midrabanan, the concept of Shemitah, we're still obligated in Hakel. Has nothing to do with practically doing the mitzvah of Shemitah. Torah was just giving us a sign of when Hakel happens. However, if we say that Hakel is dependent on Shemitah, so then min ha-Torah we shouldn't be exempt from Hakel if we're not doing the mitzvah of Shemitah. Now going back to Rashi, the way we explained Rashi, and especially the way Rashi finishes off, why is it called Shnas HaShemitah? Because the dinim of Shemitah still apply. In other words, according to Rashi, it's clearly a direct continuation to what was happening in Shemitah in the 7th year. So following from that, it would be that the mitzvah of Hakel is dependent on the fulfillment of mitzvah Shemitah min ha-Torah. The Rebbe just adds in the following next little section, the Rebbe says that nevertheless, this is not an absolute terms. We can technically say that even if the mitzvah Shemitah in the 7th year is midrabanon, since practically we weren't doing work, so as far as Hakel is concerned, it could still be that min ha-Torah you have the mitzvah of Hakel, because practically the previous year we didn't plow, we didn't sow, and therefore we are obligated in the mitzvah of Hakel. The Rebbe gives an example that we find certain inyanim, what's called a kinyan midrabanon, could even help in regards to inyanim min ha-Torah. In other words, even though technically min ha-Torah this thing didn't apply, but once the Rabbanon made the kinyan, so it could apply, it would still help for inyanim midoiraisa. So here too, even though it's only the Rabbanon de Shemitah, nevertheless it can help for the Torah de Hakel. Now the Rebbe moves on to, the Rebbe is going to go more into the Chassidus aspect of what Hakel is all about. But the Rebbe starts off by saying, we still need to understand, but Pnimi Yisrael Inyanim. The Rebbe says, the Toich and the idea of Shnas HaShemitah, which, what do we see in the Torah, what it says? In Torah Shebeksav, what does it say Shemitah is all about? Is not the fact that we were discussing before, that Yidden are going to be free from working and therefore they have more time for Limudat Torah. That's not what it says in the Torah. Rather, the Torah speaks about Shabbos, Shabbos, and Yiyah La'aretz, the land is going to rest, and we're not going to be able to sow, we're not going to be able to prune, etc. And this is what helps in the next 6 years when we are going to be involved in our field work. How is that? Because when a Yid shows that in the Shemitah year he recognizes that everything belongs to Hashem, nothing really belongs to him, everything belongs to Hashem. There's the Rebbe's quoting from the Chinuch in the idea of the mitzvah of Shemitah. In other words, the Yid shows and he acknowledges that the Eibishter Hashem is the boss over his field and everything in the world, as explained at length in those that are explained the Taimei HaMitzvahs. And therefore, when he's going to get involved in his field with sowing, with pruning, etc., in the 6 years, he'll always do it in accordance to Hashem's desire. In other words, recognizing that the Eibishter is the Balabayis over the whole world. That's the way mitzvah of Shemitah is normally understood, based on what says simply in the Psukim, that the main thing is that we're actually not doing the work in the field, etc. Says the Rebbe, now let's tie this back to Hakel. Since the Torah emphasizes that the mitzvah of Hakel is b'moyed shnas HaShemitah, it's to do with the mitzvah of Shemitah, and I said before that Hakel is a continuation of the Hisoyrus of the year of Shemitah, as it's in the 8th year. Says the Rebbe, so we have to say that also this is Oyrus of Shemitah, this idea of Shemitah, that we're recognizing that everything is Hashem's, that this too is somehow coming in continuation from the 6 years through this, his Oyrus of what we're doing by Hakel. So this is what the Rebbe asks, we need to understand. Where do we find in Hakel the his Oyrus in regards to this idea? Just to clarify again. Before we were explaining that the idea of Shemitah is that we're able to sit and learn Torah. We take that as Soirus, that during the next 6, so Hakel is telling us, let's take that inspiration for the next 6 years, to still be involved in Kedusha and in Torah, etc. But now that we're understanding that Shemitah is more about the idea, or in addition to what we said before, but I'll be Pshat and Psukim, Shemitah is more about the idea that we're not the boss over our own private fields. It's all the Eibishter's, and that's the message we're supposed to be taking for the next 6 years after Shemitah. So the Rebbe is asking, if Hakel is supposed to take the inspiration of Shemitah into the next 6 years, where do we see this idea in Hakel? This idea that the Eibishter is the only boss. Says the Rebbe via Shloima, we can explain this, that this is actually connected with the Parshias of the Torah that the king reads in Hakel. The Mishnah enumerates, the Rebbe is quoting over the Girsa of Rashi, that the Melech reads from the beginning of Eila HaDvarim, from Chumash Dvarim, all the way till Shema. He reads Shema, V'hoyoyim Shamoya, Aser to Aser, the dinim of giving Meiser, Kisachalal Aser, when you finish giving Meiser, then he reads the Brachis and Klolois, and the Parsha of the king, Osimoy Alay Melech, appointing a king. So the Rebbe is going to now show how these Parshias are connected to the inspiration that was supposed to be taken from Shemitah into the following years. So the Rebbe explains. The mitzvah of Shemitah generally can be divided into 3 aspects. There's number 1, the fact that the person is resting. In other words, the person, there's an isur, there's a prohibition. The person is not allowed to be involved with avodas ha'adama, with agriculture. He has to, and as we said before, he dedicates himself with learning and spirituality, etc. Number 2, there's the fact that the land is resting. V'shav sa aretz Shabbos la'Hashem. Since the land is resting right now from all of its types of work, so there's no, this year there's no work happening in the land, so the land itself is experiencing a Shabbos la'Hashem, a rest for Hashem. Point number 3 is in regards to the produce, the fruit that grows in the Shnas HaShemitah, they are hefker, they are free for all. The owner of the field is not allowed to keep it as something that belongs privately to him. Says the Rebbe, what are these 3 things? The general idea of mitzvah Shemitah is, as we said before, is to show that everything is under the domain of Hashem. Hashem is the one that owns it all. But, says the Rebbe, there's 3 aspects in this itself. In each one of these 3 things that we just mentioned is highlighting a different aspect of Hashem's bailus, of Hashem's ownership, as we'll explain now. Number 1, we have Shavis HaSadam, the fact that the person is resting. This emphasizes the fact that Hashem is the owner over the person. In other words, Ani Nivreisi L'Shamish Eskoini. Number 1, a Yid has to understand that he was created just to serve Hashem. And the reason why we have a special year for this in Shemitah is because a Yid, when he's involved in the worldly matters, so it could happen that at the time he could forget of the purpose of why he was created, and that he's a servant of Hashem. And that his Ratzoin and Avodah need to be, the way it should be, is that he should constantly want to be cleaving to Hashem. So Hashem gives us after every 6 years, a specific year, when a Yid separates himself from all worldly matters, dedicates himself completely to spiritual Avodah, in where it's noticeable clearly how the Yid is connecting to Hashem. This then gives the koyak to the Yid that when he's going to go into the next 6 years of working and plowing, etc., and pruning and all of the work, so even that involvement is going to be in a way of avodas Hashem. It's all going to be to serve Hashem. He's doing it l'shem shamayim. He's doing it b'chol drachech le'eyu. So this is point number one. Point number two is that the land is resting. This emphasizes the bailus of Hashem's ownership on the ground, on the earth, or more generally on all of nature, including the laws of nature. As the Pasuk says, when Yidden are going to turn around and say, what are we going to eat in the 7th year? If we're not sowing, if we're not planting, if we're not harvesting, etc., we're not gathering our grain. So Hashem says, I'm going to command my bracha, I'm going to give a bracha in the 6th year, that it's going to be enough for 3 years, for the 6th year, for the 7th year, for the 8th year. Says the Rebbe, according to the laws of nature, for plants to grow, for fruits to grow, for the produce and the grain to grow is always going to depend on the work that was put in beforehand, the plowing, the sowing. Hashem comes along in the year of Shemitah and shows that the fact that the earth is producing its grain and the fruit is not because of the earth by itself. It's not because the earth has that power on its own. And therefore you need to have the plowing or the sowing. Rather, the Shemitah year shows that the Eibishter is the one that allows all of this to happen. And when the Eibishter wants, then the ground is going to produce, not according to nature. To the extent that that which was worked in 1 year, in the 6th year, is going to be in a supernatural way, enough for 3 years, as the Pasuk says, what does this aspect of Shemitah give the Yid? This gives the Yid the recognition and the feeling that even in the 6 years when he's plowing and he's sowing, he recognizes that that which is growing in his field is not because of the plowing and the sowing, but rather that is because of the bracha of Hashem. So far we have 2 points, that the Eibishter is the boss and the owner over the person, and secondly over nature itself, over the earth itself. Point number 3, we said, is the fact that the fruits are hefker. What does this bring out? That Hashem is the balabayis, Hashem is the owner on the possessions of the person. Even after Hashem gave you already and benched you with possessions, it always remains Hashem's. It's always within Hashem's domain. Meaning to say, a person may think to himself, yes, it's true, that only Hashem is the one that's able to give the bracha and the koyach, that the produce, that the grain should grow. And it's not about the plowing and the sowing or whatever special things, the power of the earth. But after Hashem has given us the bracha already, and the produce and the grain has grown already, and now the person has it, so now Hashem has given it over to the person, and now it's his. Now, yes, it's true the person understands that since he's created only to serve Hashem, therefore it's obvious that even everything the person has, he needs to utilize to serve Hashem by using it for matters of kedusha, as we said before, by using kol masach l'shem shamayim, etc. But nevertheless, at the end of the day, there might still be a bit of that feeling that the possessions belong to me, but I am going to decide to use it as Hashem wants. Comes along this third aspect of Shemitah, where the Yid has absolutely no ownership over his fruit, over his possessions. And this expresses the idea that once in 7 years, the Torah is telling us that all fruits that are growing in your own field are hefker to everyone, reminding the Yid that even the 6 years where he is allowed to keep the fruit for himself, it's not really because it truly belongs to you to do whatever you want with it, but rather that it's Hashem's possessions and it was just given to you. You're holding on to it, that you should be able to be Hashem's shliach to carry out what Hashem wants with it. Now that we understand Shemitah in this way, and this is the messages that we're supposed to be taking from Shemitah for the following years, we're now going to see how Hakel is connected to this, and Hakel is again that link to carry over this message into the other years. And where is this going to be? Says the Rebbe, this idea, these 3 points, the Shvisas Adam, that the person is resting, that the land is resting, and that the fruits of Shemitah are hefka for everything, which express again the ownership of Hashem on all 3, on the person, on the world itself and nature, and the possessions of the person. This is going to be expressed in the parshas that we read in Hakel, which we mentioned before. We have the parsha of Shema, we have V'hoyim Shamoya, we have Aser to Aser and Kichalot Kichalot Aser. How does this all fit with what we were just talking about? In parsha of Shema, we're speaking about the spiritual avodah v'yid, Kabbalah Sol Malchus Shamayim, accepting the yoke of Hashem. We speak about learning Torah, fulfilling mitzvahs like tefillin and mezuzah. This is all in accordance to the first point of Shemitah, that the person has to rest in the Shemitah year so that he could be free to be able to devote himself and dedicate himself to spiritual matters. The Parsha of Oyim Shemoya speaks about how when we listen to Hashem, Hashem is going to give us rain in the right time. We're going to be able to gather all of the grain. And chas v'shalom, the other way, if we don't do what we're supposed to, then the earth is not going to produce. This emphasizes the second point we said, how Hashem is the balabayis on the laws of nature itself. And that this is why the very gashmius of a yid v'yosafta the ganecha is dependent not on his plowing and sowing, but on shamoya tishmo mitzvahs and listening to Hashem, to obey Hashem's desire. And finally, the parashiyos of Aser to Aser and Kisachalal Aser, about giving Maasros, are emphasizing how the possessions of a Yid, even as you have it, it's only as a pikadon. Hashem gave it to you to hold on to watch for him, and that you're not the true boss of it. In other words, you have to do what Hashem is telling you to do with these particular items. This expresses the idea how you're taking a part of your possessions and you're giving it away to another Yid, whether it's matnos aniyim, the gifts to the poor, the trumos, the maasros, going back similar to the idea of the Shemitah year, where we understand that the fruits are hefker for everyone. Says the Rebbe, and this is why we conclude, the last thing that is mentioned over there is that we read the parashiyos of the Melech, and also who is the one that reads all of this? It's also the Melech reads these parashiyos, but then we also conclude with reading the parsha of appointing a king, because the true recognition of a person, the true recognition that a person, that everything he has, and all of creation itself is not something for itself, but rather all belongs to Hashem, is mainly accomplished through the king himself. Because what's the main task of the king? Is to draw down into the Yidden, and to the Yidden, the idea of Kabbalas, Oil, Malchus, Shamayim, and Yiras Hashem, and the ultimate feeling of true bittul, which doesn't allow for any mitzias, for any reality outside of Hashem. The Tzemach Tzedek explains this in Arichos when he discusses the mitzvah of appointing a king, that the main point of the king is really about getting the Yidden to have Kabbalah soil for the ultimate king, for the true king for Hashem. Says the Rebbe, this will now also be the deeper explanation in the idea that we said that the dinim of Shemitah still apply in the beginning of the 8th year, when Katzer Shel Shvius, Hayoytze L'moitzai Shvius. Why is that? This recognition that we're taking from the fact that the land is resting, that Hashem is the balabayis over the earth itself and the laws of nature. The truth of the matter is, we have this anyways in the 8th year, because we're eating still from that which was planted in the 6th year. As we said before, that you're planting in the 6th year, it's going to grow you're going to have fruit all the way to the 8th year. And the pasuk says, the pasuk then goes on and says, how? That then when you're going to plant in the 8th year, you'll have really from the grain, from the old grain, you'll have all the way till the 9th year. In other words, it's all happening in a very, very miraculous way. So we see clearly in an open way the bracha of Hashem, that because according to the nature, this shouldn't have happened at all. So that really that's obvious. But in order that we should have the recognition in the 8th year itself, that what? That not only the land, Hashem runs the teva of the land, but rather that everything of the person, that the person owns, really belongs to Hashem. So for this we have the second aspect, that the dinim of Shemitah still apply in the produce that grew in the end of the 7th year into the 8th year, that even though we're in the 8th year, still the person is still not the balabayis of seemingly what's his field, and therefore he recognizes and feels that it all belongs to Hashem. And b'meila, therefore, when we have this time, that we're still feeling somewhat of the Shemitah atmosphere, both in how we see how Hashem is sustaining the person, as well as that the person feels that he's not a metzias for himself, because even in his own field, he's not allowed to act as a balabayis. This is the most opportune time for the reading of the parashiyos of Hakel through the Melech, that it should have a real panimiyisdika effect, also for the following 6 years, till, as the pasuk says, v'lamdu, that the Yidden will learn to fear Hashem for all of the days, asher chayin, atem chayin, that you live, al ha'adama on earth, on the land.